that a family can be put in jail, in prison, because of their association with a particular person, a family member who is the one that is considered to be politically undesirable. But the two daughters are growing up in these camps. They're young. I think they were 8 and 11, exactly, 8 and 11 years old, and that's where they're spending their youth. If North Korea were to take any action on this case, or on cases like that, where whole families and children and grandparents are all incarcerated together, this would show that they're ready to end this horrific practice for which they've gained quite a notorious reputation, and it would show some change that were taking place. Will North Korea allow the International Committee of the Red Cross, the World Food Program, and UNICEF into the penal labor camps? That's number 6. It is estimated that there are about 200,000 political prisoners. That's more, I believe, than any other country in the world by far. Because of the starvation rations in these camps, there's a very high rate of death in detention. And human rights groups have recommended that the ICRC, the World Food Program, etc., be allowed in to provide food and medical care. Were North Korea to allow this, it could end the isolation of some of these prisoners and save lives. And it could be a step toward the dismantlement of the camps, if anything like that were to begin to happen. 7, will North Korea agree to release the people I mentioned before, those abducted, and give a full accounting of those held? Should it begin to release those who are still, the abductees that are still living in North Korea, or provide a full accounting, or return their remains, or offer compensation, they would probably gain, the North Koreans, a lot of political and economic concessions. I mean, the Japanese and the South Korean governments are ready to negotiate this. 8th, will North Koreans continue to be punished for leaving the country without permission? For some 15 years, North Koreans leave their country without permission, and they are forcibly returned by China, many of them. They're subject to very harsh treatment, beatings, torture, some forced labor, imprisonment, some are executed, and women who become impregnated in China by Chinese men, if they're forcibly returned, there's forced abortions that are performed on them quite regularly. And if the pregnancy is advanced, then the infant is born and is either beaten to death by the guards or buried alive. Were North Korea begin to ease its controls over its population in terms of allowing them to leave and return or go over the border and not make this into a criminal act, it would be a big change in the nature of this regime. 9th, will North Korea introduce human rights education and disseminate to schools, offices, and institutions the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights treaties that it, of its own accord, ratified on children, on women, on civil and political rights, on economic, social, and cultural rights? If they were to make known to their population the rights to which people are entitled, this would be a big change, of course. And I think that UN bodies should be insisting on disseminating these documents in North Korea, in Korean language, obviously. 10th, and the last benchmark I put together, will North Korea allow food aid to reach the hungry? Now, since 2008, international aid agencies have reported that because of enhanced monitoring, that food aid that they have given has actually reached in substantial quantities numbers of hungry people in North Korea. Yes. North Korean defectors have challenged this and said, no, most of the food is diverted to the military. But last year, in agreement with the European Union, the World Food Program, and also with some South Korean NGOs, North Korea allowed strengthened monitoring. And also in negotiations with the United States that will not bear fruit, but in the negotiations, North Korea agreed to strengthen monitoring when the food aid will resume. So there looks like there is some change in the North Korean attitude to the UN principle of no access, no food. However, this is only a part of the problem, food distribution. The more fundamental question is whether there's a readiness to address the root causes of the chronic hunger and improve the deteriorating health of the population. And here, there's no evidence that I'm aware of any effort toward changing collectivized agriculture, lifting restrictions on markets, allocating more resources for food and health care in the budget. North Korea continues its military-first policy, which gives priority in the allocation of resources to the Army. So to conclude, right now there's no change in human rights that we're aware of, but it cannot be ruled out that at some point North Korea may find it beneficial to begin to distance itself, or its new leaders to distance themselves from the cruelties and excesses of the Kim Jong-Il regime, and to reap some benefits which might be political and economic by joining the international community. So I would suggest that you can test their intent by examining their actions in light of the above criteria. And I think it's important to, what I would say, unpack the human rights issue, because very often people say human rights. Well, what are we really talking about? What do you expect them to do? And so I think it's important to know what it is, what these steps are, what we would like to see them do, what signs exist, so you can measure it and you also know what your expectations are. And you don't just talk generally, what is human rights? I think it's important for that reason. I hope you'll all do that. And this is actually in an article on 38 North. So if anybody wanted to look at more details, it's on the web under 38 North. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you to Think for inviting me here today. Actually, my first encounter with Think was maybe your first program that you had last year or 2 years ago. And I was interning at the State Department at the time as a grad student. And my boss at the time forwarded me an email, I think event email, and said, this looks like a very interesting event. You should go, take notes, listen carefully, maybe ask a question, and report back. And so that's what I did. So I give you kudos for growing the group even further. And I think we were in a smaller group, a smaller room, but now we're in a big room. I think Dr. Cha was a speaker, then I think I might have asked a question and posed at you. So I'm glad to be here. And today I was tasked to talk about North Korea's economy, which is a huge topic to handle in 10 minutes. So I'll try to do justice and give you a brief overview of the history of the economy and its failures and where it is now, and then maybe leave you with some of my personal thoughts on the future prospects. So if someone asked me to describe North Korean economy in a non-technical, econ data-driven way, I would say that it's a story of missed opportunities that's rooted in mismanagement and lack of ability for leaders to change the rules of the economic games and according to the new challenges that came up in their economy. North Korea basically regards their economic policies and quote-unquote reforms and innovations to be instruments for survival and not necessarily for a comprehensive development strategy. So it's really difficult to bring about a transformation into the system when economic policies are just targeted to control and to sustain survival. And this point is made at the very recent quote in an article in the Nodong Shinmun on the 26th of March, actually. So I'll read you a quote. It says, "Missing Kim Jong-Il ever so much, all service persons and people look back upon the proud path of economic construction they came along under the uplifted banner of Songbun. They feel deeply that the Songbun political method is indeed the fundamental factor for making great innovation and progress both in the economic construction and in the defense of the country." So you can see that the economic identity is also just deeply rooted in their ideology and the identity of the nation. It's not a purely economic policy. I would personally describe it as sort of an awkward, autocratic market economy, and that even sounds awkward to me. And just to put a little bit more metaphor into it so that you have a big picture understanding, it's almost like this a fire notch, right, in your stove, and there's only two levers, right? It's either on or off, and they're trying to figure out how to gauge, get the fire in the right volume, but they just can't seem to do that. It's either one way or the other. So with that in mind, I'll throw you some numbers at you. So the North Korean economy was valued at 30,049 billion won for the year of 2010, which is a little less than 3% of the size of the South Korean economy. So that gives you some perspective. And also in 2010, North Korea's real annual GDP was decreased by 0.5%, which makes it the second consecutive year of economic contraction. And I'll kind of talk you through the phases of North Korea's economy so that you can put some framework into it. The first phase I call leading up to the trouble. So after the Korean War, as many of you know, the North Korean economy was much superior to the South Korean economy. But the stagnation really started in the 70s after the initial push for industrialization. And this is because North Korea fell into this classic poverty trap in the 70s and the 80s, where the economic growth was insufficient to meet or to replace the deteriorating capital stock, or to invest in new technologies to boost productivity. And which means that they need external investment, but at the time, around that time, Soviet Union collapsed, so their external investment was basically depleted. So by the 1990s, their industrial stock was pretty much gone. And then compounding that problem in 1995 and 96 were the floods, the natural disasters, the public food distribution system broke down. So there's a brief description of why the famine took place in 1997, among other things. And then phase two is actually, they recognize this problem and they try to deal with this problem. So it's dealing with the problem, the trouble. And so in reaction, they actually surprisingly, somewhat surprisingly, instigated reforms. So in 1998, they, for the first time, they amended the Constitution to mention the words cost, price, and profits, and